Good evening from Copenhagen. It is 5 p.m. in UK. It's Wednesday, so it's time for Smarter Webley Wednesdays. I'm lucky to have with me here today Croesus, Jesse Myers, who's the new jockey with the faster horse in UK, investor and jockey. How's it going, Jesse?
I guess I'm more of like I'm cleaning the stalls at the end of the day. Andrew's the jockey riding the horse, but I'm helping out.
I think you both have I know you have a lot of influence there, and I think he hired you after you offered some of your analysis, shared it with him, and he found it useful. That happened in Baker's in an elevator, and I remember you explaining on some podcast. So, but tell us, you've been there for a little while now. What's going on,
Yeah,
and how does it feel?
it feels great. I was thinking about it today that obviously for any Bitcoiner, the most exciting thing in the world is Bitcoin. Because once you see it, once you really understand what's going on here, it's nothing in the world compares to what's happening with Bitcoin. But then the most exciting thing that's happening in Bitcoin is Bitcoin treasury companies, because of what they mean for how capital will shift in the global asset landscape to Bitcoin. And then in the Bitcoin treasury landscape, the most exciting thing that I think is going on is Smarter Web, like by far, because it's pretty incredible what Andrew's built, what Andrew's already put in place. And it's pretty incredible the path that I see ahead of us. All we have to do is just keep executing. And this is following the same playbook that Metaplanet has pioneered over the last 15 months of like how you grow from nothing to being a leading Bitcoin treasury company in a particular capital market. And we are on that path, and there's quite a clear, there's no roadblocks ahead. We just have to keep doing what we're doing every week and keep that going. And it's going to be very exciting what comes of it.
Yeah, um, couldn't agree more. So you're saying you find SWC. I mean, obviously that's where you invested. That's where you're working. Like by far the most interesting. Like what makes SWC more interesting than other fast growing Bitcoin accumulating companies?
Yeah, great question. I love that chart from Bitcoin B, who kind of laid out like, here's the rate of Bitcoin accumulation for various notable Bitcoin treasury companies from the time they started, kind of lining up the timescales from first Bitcoin buy. And the one that sticks out is Smarter Web, because it's just this rocket while the others are going up and to the right. And I think that contains a lot. Like that chart tells you a lot about the company, about the culture too, about how Andrew runs the company. The man just executes. I think it's actually like a or not well understood, or sort of not articulated advantage that Smarter Web has, that Andrew's been running this business for 15 years. And think about what the business has been for 15 years. It's been 250 clients that need shit done, and a small team that has to get shit done to serve those clients, right? And so that 15 years of that culture just getting solidified of get shit done and move fast, because we got a lot to do and no time. So they're really efficient, and Andrew's brought that same work ethic and mentality without even unconsciously. It's just how he operates, right? And he's brought that to how do you accumulate Bitcoin? How do you execute as a Bitcoin treasury company? And I think that shows up in that chart of like the pace is just faster. And I think that the market is recognizing that this is a competitive advantage that Smarter Web has in the UK, but then also globally, like among other similar sized Bitcoin treasury companies. Like, who's going to deliver the most yield the fastest? Well, probably the company that's been executing faster than anybody else.
So I think well, what I want to ask you, so this rocket ship growth, and I agree that graph is extremely interesting for both SWC and H100. And you've been nicknamed the faster horse because of that, I think, and Andrew's execution, and I'm sure the whole team behind. Would Do you think also there's some market conditions in UK that allows SWC to grow faster than by far most others?
Yeah, I think it's, when strategy succeeded, 5 years ago, starting this playbook, I think everybody assumed you had to be in the same kind of circumstances. You needed a cash cow business that was a certain scale in order to service your debts and do this playbook. So nobody tried it after, it was unique. And then Metaplanet said, you know what, we can try this from a failing hotel company, basically, a company worth $10 million, a company worth nothing, and it worked, right? Like that playbook worked in that context. And yeah, and so, Smarter Web has learned from those things and refined the playbook a little bit further. Sorry, I'm missing half of your question, but
Sure. Oh, I don't know if it cut out, but I
no,
guess
it was me. I derailed myself.
all good. So what I'm thinking about is this fast growth, this fast raise of money. Does it have anything to do with like James from the local investor community? I had him on
Oh yeah,
about a month
UK.
ago.
That's
That there's some money can't go anywhere else. If they want
yeah,
to go in Bitcoin, they kind of got to go into SWC.
yeah. That was the leap. I forgot myself after I'd started on it. But so strategy was unique. Nobody could replicate it. Turns out actually you can replicate it, and Metaplanet has done that. And I think everybody kind of thinks Metaplanet's unique. You can't replicate that because in Japan they have certain preferential tax treatment for companies holding Bitcoin rather than as opposed to individuals holding Bitcoin, and that's a tailwind, right? But actually, there's tailwinds in other jurisdictions too, and the big one in the UK is that retirement account money can't access Bitcoin currently. So there's a lot of there's 1 or 2 trillion pounds worth of capital that can't access Bitcoin, and along comes Smarter Web pioneering this model in the UK, and that's a big tailwind for adoption there. And I think is also part of Smarter Web having a lot of traction and like a very authentic connection with the retail investor base in the UK, because people have been looking for something like this, and they're pissed off that the FCA, the SEC, in the UK hasn't allowed them to access Bitcoin with their retirement account money. So it's a very authentic fit, analogous to how Metaplanet is a very authentic fit for its own reasons. And so I think it's kind of amazing actually if you think about the UK and Japan have a ton of similarities on paper if you zoom out enough, right? Like island nations with a proud history and strong economy that have faced tough times in recent years economically, and both have had structural reasons why it's been hard to access Bitcoin. And so Metaplanet's success there was fueled in large part by those reasons. And I think that's what we're seeing, as one of the big tailwinds that's helping Smarter Web in the UK for different reasons, but same idea.
So and I'm wondering like how long of a runway does this advantage have of 1.2 trillion pounds, which is the only national currency worth more than the dollar in per unit, so to speak. That's a lot of dollars. It's a lot of pound. How long will, what's the size of, if we take a quick look at your analytics page on the Smarter Web Company page, we see, so the market cap is only £500 million. So there's now, obviously, I'm not saying that let me just tackle this away again. I'm not saying, of course, it's going to go all the way to one trillion, but there seems to be quite a runway there for.
So the numbers there. I mean, if we use 1.2 trillion, and we'll call it 600 million pounds, that's 0.05% of that amount, right? And like, what should your allocation be to Bitcoin, right? Like that's for anybody to decide, but for me, it's a lot higher than that. That's for sure. And I think that's probably where the world is heading, to an allocation much higher than 0.05% to Bitcoin. Of course, like I think that Bitcoin ETFs, they're the equivalent in the UK, will be happening, and they should be happening. That people in the UK deserve to have access to a product that, like an ETF, that tracks Bitcoin cleanly. And Smarter Web doesn't, so it's not a substitute for an ETF. Obviously, the focus for us is to grow Bitcoin per share, and that comes with a whole layer of volatility on top of Bitcoin's price. And so investors deserve to have both, right? The access to both strategies. Want something that tracks Bitcoin cleanly, but then also something whose stated intent is to compound Bitcoin per share over time.
Yeah, and also what I was just thinking of is, if we look at again your website here, the analytics, the MNAV is right now you reported to like 3.19, and
is it now? Wow.
Yeah, and so that means, since you've accumulated roughly 2,000 Bitcoin, your market cap is around bit more than 6,000 Bitcoin, let's say 6,400 Bitcoin or so, or 6,500 Bitcoin. But there's a long way up to that 1.2 trillion, and obviously it won't take all of it. You won't take half of it, probably not even a quarter, etc. But Bitcoin is the best.
1% of that, it's a gigantic tailwind. And let's talk about the MNAV right now. Of like, so we put out a Bitcoin buy announcement today. It puts us up to 2,050 Bitcoin that we're holding. And I was running some numbers on this earlier, and I put out a tweet about it. But our 30-day Bitcoin yield is 224% right now, and that is very interesting to me, because that means that if you bought, and the price wasn't this 30 days ago, but if you had bought at 3.24 Bitcoin MNAV 30 days ago, today would be the day that your investment would have grown into that premium that you paid 30 days ago, right? So, delivering plus 224% in Bitcoin per share in 30 days. Meanwhile, our current MNAV is now below that number, right? So like that to me is very interesting. It's very compelling, I think, if you're an investor who and this is a high bar, right? You have to be an investor who understands Bitcoin, understands the math of Bitcoin yield and compounding Bitcoin, and is prepared to part with Bitcoin or give up the opportunity cost of just holding Bitcoin in order to take on this risk of hopefully compounding that Bitcoin. But so that's asking a lot, and there's not a ton of people at this moment in time who are equipped to understand that value proposition, that investment thesis. but I think it's a big opportunity for those who are.
Yeah, it's probably none of what we're saying here is financial advice. At best, it's financial entertainment. However, if you do like the entertainment, please like and subscribe, share with someone. But so yeah, we've seen it across the board. With someone like MetaPlanet, they also have a swing down right now in their channel of MNAV development. So it seems to oscillate, and there's a cycle. So it could look like an opportune time, but it's not financial advice. And I have made mistakes before, so let me say that. Uh, Jesse, preferred stocks that strategy now is really hitting it out of the ballpark with. They finally hit the one. There's a big demand for short term, like basically 30 days parking of the money, not losing, no swings in your capital, but just adjustments of the interest rate. They have raised 2.4 billion. 2.4 billion it is here on that, and they purchased 21 Bitcoin based on that. Is When is it possible? When does it make sense? How many Bitcoin do you need to have to launch preferreds in the UK market?
Yeah, a super interesting topic, and kind of, I don't think there is an answer. First of all, I think, obviously this is brand new stuff. Strategy only launched preferreds like 6 months ago, right? Um, and obviously when they did it, they had already a huge balance sheet of Bitcoin. Call it 500,000 Bitcoin. I'm not sure what it was. Um, and I think, again, the sort of assumption was, oh, you have to be at Strategy's kind of scale to make it make sense. But 6 months later, here we're already starting to see some serious, hinting from MetaPlanet that they're, just around the corner to launching their own preferreds. And their balance sheet is, I guess, a little over 15,000 Bitcoin, probably closer to 20 now, right? Um, and that kind of leaves, it makes it an open question of how big of a balance sheet do you need to have in order for this to make sense. And I think the answer is it can vary, right? Like, you just have to right size, the amount of preferreds you're launching. Of course, these things have costs up front to launch, so you can't do it with 100 Bitcoin on your balance sheet. But it's somewhere in the middle, probably between 100 Bitcoin and 15,000 Bitcoin. And I don't know what the right answer is there. It's obviously something we think is the goal, or perhaps the end game of where you want to go as a Bitcoin treasury company, with a leadership position in a capital market. You want to have a healthy balance sheet and a strong track record, such that you can launch preferreds and generate demand for them. Because if you think about the other side, like, nobody should be interested in handing over capital for a fixed income kind of arrangement if it's a brand new Bitcoin treasury company that hasn't developed any balance sheet or track record. So you need to get to a certain level of comfort there, of confidence, for the other side of the deal to be interested. And we'll see where that is. And that I don't think it's any time in the immediate horizon, but I think it's the kind of thing that we would be hoping to at least pilot, when we get to, maybe it's 5,000, maybe it's 10,000 Bitcoin, somewhere in that range. I think it's very much on the table. And of course, you need to anticipate when that point in time might be in the future, and start work in advance of that to get ready for some opportunity like that. So that, we'll see. It's not something that's on the immediate horizon, and I think it's important to emphasize that to people, to investors. but it is very much something we want to do right, and have it be successful. And we think there's a path to eventually get there.
Right. Yeah, that makes perfect sense. It's a matter of time. The one thing I'm thinking of is it seems that it takes a lot of time, at least in US. Of course, each market is different, for someone like Strategy to get a credit rating on their preferred stocks, even though there's so much collateral behind. So it seems that seems to argue for, like, let's throw them out so they can go through whatever period of the local rating agency getting a rating on it, so there's an easier automatic sale, more or less, once they get that, because then the big capital allocators will choose it because it's a good yield, and it's,
Yeah. I think it's also like, I think it's important to call attention to, like, at SmarterWeb's current scale, life cycle stage, however you want to think about it. Over the last 30 days, we just delivered plus 224% Bitcoin yield. That means that we're still at a small enough size that the best thing we can be doing is the pure equity play, right? Like, preferreds start to make a lot more sense as your MNAV really compresses, because the market's starting to anticipate, like, for strategies, how are you gonna stack how are you gonna double your Bitcoin stack? Like, that gets you to 1.2 million Bitcoin. That's hard. So the MNAV has to be kind of low, because just the physics of it. But we're at a scale still where, as Metaplanet has shown, there's a lot of growth that we can achieve through pure equity issuance. And I think that's the most accretive thing that we can be doing as a company right now, is focusing on that path.
yeah.
While keeping in mind that, eventually you need to grow into the next life cycle stage, further down the road, which is sort of transitioning into the preferred equities. Tapping into the bond market is what that really means, like tapping into fixed income capital as your primary fuel source in the future. But what Metaplanet has done with moving strike warrants for 15 months is just focus on that.
And they've done great, and you guys are doing phenomenal at the high speed. So you're talking about that. The best thing to do right now is basically selling stock, and the preferreds is a little bit further down. Less Sharma had, and what may be the next thing to think about for SWC. Like, I've seen some things on X today. I think there was potentially an Easter egg somewhere and something from you guys. Obviously, you can't say anything that is not already out public, and none is. But what can you say? Is this, when does this, how big do you need to be for this to make sense? Is that something that could theoretically make sense from now on? 500
Yeah.
billion?
I can say that we're not spending our time planting Easter eggs. So if we can diffuse any
Okay.
suspicion there. But I think it's something that we're considering and evaluating, and it is theoretically doable at a scale much smaller than we currently are. We're the largest company on Aquis by quite a bit, and there are much smaller companies on London Stock Exchange. So that's about all I can say right there. And obviously, we are interested in being listed in the places that make the most sense for attracting the most capital.
Yeah, of course. That's the name of the game, getting that capital. So one thing, I know you have a 10-year plan. 10-year plan is a long time in this space. I have my own personal targets for what I believe is possible for different Bitcoin accumulating companies like you and Metaplanet and Strategy, and I use that sort of when I allocate my tiny investment funds towards you guys. Does the 10-year plan you have say anything about your Bitcoin goal? Of, are you going for 0.5% of all the Bitcoin, 105,000, or what What are you guys
Yeah.
thinking?
Yeah, in our investor deck, which we put out on our website, if anybody's interested, you can go to the investor top right corner button on our website and go find the presentations section, and it should be right there. Yeah, in that we included how we view it. Of our aspiration is to get to 1% of all Bitcoin that will ever exist. Um, you know, I think that is possible for every leading Bitcoin treasury company in a major capital market, right? And how many of those are there in the world? I don't know. I guess that's maybe that's half a dozen, maybe that's a dozen, and that's probably the extent of that list of like who can reach 1%. But I think that's possible for those companies, and so I think that means Metaplanet can reach that scale. I think it also means that the winner in the UK can reach that scale, and I think that Smarter Web has, uh, certainly in my book, the highest probability of being that winner in the UK, just based on current position and track record and everything that I'm seeing on the inside in terms of how we're executing and running the business.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's I think what the scale of what's possible, and of course that comes back to like that chart I'm known for with the global asset landscape of like there's a lot of capital sitting in overpriced, overvalued traditional equities. There's a lot of capital sitting in fixed income, and they're both getting not great returns when you account for monetary inflation. And Bitcoin represents this, much more attractive way to generate returns in the 21st century. And I think that there's going to be a migration of capital. There, inevitably, osmotically, there's a natural migration towards Bitcoin. And I think Bitcoin treasury companies are the capital pumps that accelerate that osmotic flow from these capital buckets into Bitcoin. And they'll do that in each of their capital markets where they have a local domestic fit, and they're plugged into that capital market scene. So I think that's going to happen, and it's just a question of who's the leader who gets to that position in each capital market.
Yeah, and I'm going to have to agree with your assessment of SWC being the most likely winner in the UK market. I would say everything points to that. The execution, current path, size, you're knocking it all out of the ballpark. So that seems very likely. I think that's not really up for debate at this point. So what else is going on in SWC that we don't know about that would be exciting for the audience? We may have covered it all, but what?
Yeah. No, I mean, that's a fun question. It's funny in that sense that like, we are in the business of increasing Bitcoin per share, right? Like that's our stated goal. And so in a funny way, like the most exciting thing you can do is boring execution of that compounding playbook, right? Like you want as much compounding as you can get, and that it generally it should look boring. Like it should look like same old every week or two. The same announcements are happening again with bigger scale, and the math continues to play out. So in a funny way, I think that's like, it's hard to get excited about the same thing happening over and over again, but like that's really what you want in a compounding Bitcoin treasury company. I will say that I think I think maybe the community would be interested to know that like we're very cognizant that as a Bitcoin treasury company, you go through life cycle stages that, what makes sense for your first 100 Bitcoin is different from, the next 10x. And then the 10x after that is a little different. And the 10x after that is very different. And so we're very, very aware of that and mindful of what makes the most sense and how do we consciously transition the strategy into what's most effective for the current leg of the journey. So, we're evaluating opportunities for different capital raising instruments. We're thinking about how do we shift the cadence of announcements, the approach to the ATM style um, structure and timing, really, and everything around the business too. Of like, how do you grow into this next scale that you've now reached, and there's a lot of growing pains that have to happen in a business that goes from £4 million market cap to billions, and we're managing all those things and upgrading the internals in order with a mind, with an eye to how do you get to that next 10x in scale. So I think that's the exciting stuff that people aren't really seeing, but it's probably good for investors to be aware that that we're thinking about it and we're very consciously trying to build the internal infrastructure necessary to get to the next level.
Right, and it makes perfect sense. I just want to share again here what quote unquote boring looks like. If we look at the
Yes.
graph on the right, Bitcoin hell is pretty exponential going upwards. So that is, but so you're right. Sometimes boring execution the same week after week. If it really works, keep doing it. If it's not broke, don't fix it. So things are looking good there. Explain to me a little bit, if you can, how. So how would you describe what you're doing now? Is that essentially like private placements, or I know you have a subscription model, and then going to the ATM? How would that change what fundraising looks like? Will we notice anything in particular, or what
Yeah.
will we do?
Yeah, that's a good topic. And I think it dovetails with what I was just saying of like, when you're starting from nothing and you raise your first 10 million pounds, right? Like you can do that with just individuals. You can do that with retail. That's pretty easy, really. And then, that's the start of your flywheel because you go from, in SmarterWeb's case, a £4 million company, you raise 10 million pounds and you plow that into Bitcoin. Suddenly that's a big change for the company. But you can do that with small investors, with anything really. And then when you reach a scale like we're at now, that mix of where you can source your capital from, it does shift a bit. Of we're at a place where yes, we still get individuals, high net worth individuals in particular, who are interested in participating in our private placements. So we do, equity issuance is private placement, and then also we have like an ATM style instrument. It's the equivalent of that, and those run in parallel, and it's lumpy for both both versions. So the ATM is running on every up day, just generating capital, and then we get that every 2 weeks. Is the going forward plan there, and then that can be deployed into Bitcoin, and the private placements are whenever the list of interested parties gets to a point where it makes sense to do it, and that changes too. Of like, we're having more conversations with institutions now, and the possible scale of the checks that they can write is quite large. You're talking about institutions that could say, yeah, I want to participate in the private placement and purchase 30 million pounds of equity, and that might even be a starter for some of these institutions. And that's big, meaningful, lumpy. I think what I'm really excited about, and I've been excited about, is the ATM style instrument coming online. I think is the key to meaningful growth for the medium term. It's easy to get to 100 Bitcoin. It's harder to get to 1,000 Bitcoin, and then going from 1,000 to 20,000 like MetaPlanet. Like how do you do that? I think the key to that is an ATM style instrument, and that's because it's based on a percentage of volume. Ultimately, like you're selling into the market directly, so you don't have to go find a bunch of high net worth individuals and institutions to write checks every 2 weeks, right? Like
Right.
instead you're selling directly into the market, and you're raising proportionate to your market cap and volume in that every 2 weeks. So that allows you to keep scaling. Like because we hypothetically we could 10x, and then if you're just doing private placements, now you have to raise 10x as much capital in order to keep moving the needle. But if you have an ATM running, then you just need the same volume to be traded in the market in order to raise 10x as much capital. So I think that's the super bullish part about having an ATM style instrument that is running well. And we're in a place now where we've had a couple cycles of it and it's working, and that is very encouraging. So we raised about 20 million pounds in 3 weeks of downtrend, right? Like that's the time period over which we were raising capital, with the most recent um, uh, amount announced. And going forward, maybe we're not in a downtrend for 3 weeks. Maybe we generate that same kind of capital in 2 weeks. That's possible. We'll see. Nothing's certain here. But if that happens, then 20 million pounds in 2 weeks, 40 million every month. That's 500 Bitcoin or so every month that we could be raising just from the current price level and the current volumes. Assuming assuming you're not in a downtrend, assuming sort of half up days and down days. But that's kind of the baseline, I think, of what you might reasonably, if you did your back of the envelope math, what you might come up with as kind of a starting point. And of course, if volume increases in the market, or if the share price increases, you end up raising more than 40 million a month, and potentially more than 500 Bitcoin a month being added to the treasury. So that's the ATM is super exciting. ATM style instrument. It is not an ATM. That's super exciting, and I think it's the key to growing like MetaPlanet has, and hopefully it pans out, similar sort of mechanics and volume growth and price growth as we continue to add Bitcoin over the coming months. And then we might be following the same kind of path that MetaPlanet did.
Right. So yeah, I have two questions for you now. First of all, so you said you raised, how much was it, 20 or 30 million during the
It's 20
downtrend?
million pounds
20 million
over the
pounds?
last 3 weeks of downtrend.
Yeah. So what is the motivation that brings the buyers to the market in the downtrend? So obviously, so I'm guessing these are not guys or girls that are spooked by the fact that the asset became cheaper.
Yeah.
So
So to clarify that 19 million and more, 19.7 or so, we raised. So I called it 20 million, but that was from the ATM style instrument running during the downtrend.
okay.
Yeah. And then on top of that, we have our private placements, our accelerated book builds, ABBs that we do. And like, to be clear, there is more inbound demand during an uptrend than there is during a downtrend. So, I think that everyone has sort of noticed this with the compression, MNAV compression across the entire Bitcoin treasury company landscape, and especially in the UK over the last month. It's been harder for every Bitcoin treasury company to raise new capital. And I think part of what I'm excited about is that you can see that there are healthy Bitcoin treasury companies that have great fundamentals that are still raising capital. And there are others that are seeing that, capital raising grind to a halt, really. Or they're failing to raise the stated amount of capital that they intended to. And I think that's very meaningful. Like, I think that reading between the lines, we're going to keep having these shakeouts, the volatility in the Bitcoin treasury company landscape, and the companies that keep their legs moving forward during these pretty violent, downswings, which come with upside volatility. That's part of the game. The companies that manage to keep moving forward and keep their fundamentals improving, meaning stacking Bitcoin and increasing Bitcoin per share, those are the ones that will come out stronger from a winter. Really, these, we've seen with Metaplanet, like in 15 months they had like 4 full cycles, really, in terms of MNAV expansion and then compression. And so it's just part of these assets, the price discovery, the monetization, if you want to call it that, of a Bitcoin treasury company. And I think it's super telling that, if a company manages to keep moving forward during a winter, what it probably means about their ability to do well in the next, good time.
No, absolutely. So that made me think of another question. I have several lined up now, Jesse, but I'll
Yeah, go for
respect
it.
your time. Sorry?
Sorry,
Bless you.
go for it. Yeah,
No,
absolutely.
no. Yeah. So, say another bear market hits, not just a correction, but like a bear market in Bitcoin, and we see potential MNAV compression on fast-growing Bitcoin accumulating companies. Let's say MNAV goes close to 1. There's several companies like that are close to 1 in US, and they're pretty stalled in the BTC yield. Is there anything else than preferred stock that can really help a Bitcoin accumulating company in a bear market low MNAV situation?
Yeah, luckily this is stuff I haven't had to pay much attention to yet, and possibly never. We'll see. There are things you can do in a, if your MNAV gets to 1 or below 1. The first thing you can do is sit on your hands, right? Like, nobody wants to hear that, but it's a possible strategy, right? Like, if you just want to wait it out, you can do that, and think about, like, okay, we're going to wait 6 months and then try to do things to get momentum going again. Barring that, if you want to keep moving at all times, you can sell puts. You can sell naked puts, as Metaplanet does. You can sell covered calls. You can sell a variety of derivatives to generate some income off of your Bitcoin treasury, in order to buy more Bitcoin and sort of, generate a modest yield. In a major Bitcoin bear market, funny enough, that's when things become most compelling to take on debt. It's probably the time when it sounds the scariest. because of the emotions that happen during a bear market. Everything feels riskier then. But that's objectively probably the best time to take on fiat debt in particular. Bitcoin denominated convertible debt is, I think, attractive at pretty much any point, if you structure it right, because the obligation is protected on, for a bear market, the obligation shrinks commensurate to Bitcoin going down. So those are always kind of compelling. And then fiat debt also becomes more compelling, sort of contrary to what you feel is right at that point in time. But those are things you can do to take on debt, to buy Bitcoin, to get the flywheel going again. You can only really do that if you have a clean balance sheet going into a bear market. You want your leverage ratio to be under 30%, certainly. Probably under 20% is better. And it also probably depends on the life cycle stage of the company. So yeah, there are things that you can do, and there's probably quite a few that I'm not aware of or haven't had to explore. There are things you can do in a low MNAV scenario, but I think that's part of what is important to avoid as a young Bitcoin treasury company. Is you want to, I think part of the magic, part of the formula that Metaplanet stumbled upon is that if you start small and get the flywheel going, you develop a track record of delivering Bitcoin yield. And the longer that track record gets, the more confidence the market has that you will continue to deliver Bitcoin yield. And that justifies a higher MNAV. It protects you from people thinking that a 1.2 MNAV is appropriate, because like Metaplanet, if the MNAV got down to 1.2, people would back up the truck to buy it because they have such a great track record of delivering Bitcoin yield. So I think that it's existentially important. It's path dependent, really, to as a small Bitcoin treasury company, build as robust of a track record as you can of like, here's what we do every month. Here's how many buys we're executing every month. Here's how we raise capital every month, so that you can point to that, and importantly, the investor community can run their own numbers and say, holy shit, this company delivers, and that justifies me stepping in to buy if the MNAV gets under 3, right? Like, and I kind of think that's what Smarter Web is benefiting from at this point in time. Like, everything has contracted significantly. MNAVs have compressed significantly, but I think that people are stepping in to buy value as they see it. When Smarter Web's MNAV has gotten down to the 3s, which was where we're at right now, given how much given how we talked about, if we do the same over the next 30 days that we've done over the last 30 days, you'd be you'd earn back your premium in 30 days, if that continued. So I think that's part of, like, you don't want to get into a position where the investor base is questioning, like, how much Bitcoin yield will they generate? Like, we don't know. You want to have a track record, and you want to keep moving forward on that track record, and that has to start from the beginning, and it can't stop along the way. So you need to keep executing and maintain that confidence, because otherwise, maybe your MNAV goes to 1, and then you're kind of stuck.
So about that, I have a theory here, and like, humor me in this one, and let me know what you think. First of all, I considered it would be a gift if MNAV goes below 1. You can sell Bitcoin and buy stock, and unless you have said you're never selling, but technically and financially, that would be very beneficial to shareholders to sell Bitcoin, buy stock, because someone is willing to sell the stock cheaper than the Bitcoin backing them. So that's kind of a no-brainer, I would say, and I see that as a gift, and that would keep the floor around one. Now, then I also see, and I want to hear your opinion on that, obviously, that the end game MNAV, it isn't one. Sure, it could be a compression from the 3 and the 5 and the 10. It isn't one. It's above one.
Yeah.
I'm guessing. I think it's conservative that it could be 1.5. So let's say strategy stacks 2 million Bitcoin, and I think they'll be worth 3 million because they'll be worth 2 million just for what's on the balance sheet, and they'll be worth probably another million. I'm just guessing here for the value of what that balance sheet can generate of income, because it will be able to generate
Yeah.
a lot of income. So if we say 1.5, maybe it's a bit, maybe it's less, maybe it's more, but probably in the ballpark. Then if your stock in a bear, or any other back stock in a bear market, goes to MNAV 1.1, I would, as an investor, think, well, this is now, even if they completely stop, running the engine now, 1.1 is a premium to where it will end up being when we don't have fiat anymore and it works as a bank or whatever. So it, if enough people understand that it's actually a discount, say below 1.5, that would kind of make it, they gravitate to 1.5. And even at 1.5, even though it's not super great in terms of how accretive the share issuance is, that would still create a BDC yield. I mean, Strategy have been selling common stock at MNAV 1.8, right? So that, to me, that's my thinking the last few days is, well, these engines can't really stall. It will be very hard. Someone's making a mistake and foregoing an opportunity. If they stall, it shouldn't be able to happen. But what's your response to that?
Yeah. Yeah. I basically agree. But I think that there are reasons why it could be driven below one. Like, you could.
Hmm.
I think that a possible outcome for how Bitcoin treasury companies, as an emerging cohort, end up getting into trouble is some of them will take on too much debt or get into kind of nasty contracts. Um, if a bear market arrives for Bitcoin and enthusiasm washes out, people are running for the exit from these Bitcoin treasury companies, trying to go back into Bitcoin or dollars. And that would be a time when an opportunistic, antagonistic hedge fund might attack a weak Bitcoin treasury company, one where they've been doing their diligence and seeing, wow, they've got a 40% leverage ratio, they've got all these warrants that that are attached to these convertible notes that they've done, and they're all coming due, and there's going to be structural headwinds, and we can short sell them, and we can drive them into well below 1x MNAV and then profit from it. So I think there are scenarios like that where you have to protect against getting into that kind of trouble on the front side, right? And that's where being in a leadership position in a capital market is really is a big help, because you don't need to take shortcuts to try to catch up. You don't need to take too much risk to try to catch up. You can keep it clean, and keep a really safe balance sheet, which is part of what Metaplanet has done. I also think that on the other sort of related topic, I think you're dead right that eventually MNAV is maybe 1.5 for Strategy. Maybe it's more like, maybe it's closer to 1.25. I think that these Strategy, for example, will be able to lend out Bitcoin to big banks that are going to be good for it because they're backed by the U.S. government, and generate maybe 5% a year, maybe it's 3% a year, on their Bitcoin, at least, right? And then what's your willingness to pay for that kind of, income, your discounted cash flow in Bitcoin terms, for a series of years where they're generating 5% every year, yeah, you're willing to pay, 25 to 50%, depending on time value of Bitcoin to you, for that, to own that asset. So that would suggest we will end up in that kind of end state for the companies that reach that leadership position and have the big enough clean Bitcoin balance sheet that they're able to, offer these preferreds and then be the kind of Bitcoin banks of that capital market, basically.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's where I think this stuff is headed long term, and that's where I think MNAVs will end up over one for those winners that succeed in each of their capital markets.
Would a market winner, if you would want to merge with a smaller Bitcoin accumulating company in your market, now if they're above MNAV 1, you could say it's like buying Bitcoin above par, which doesn't make sense. But if it happens as a stock issuance and like a merger, we put the stocks together, so it doesn't really, it's not pushing a lot of new stock into the market like you would do with the ATM. It would happen as a transaction where they get shares of the new company. Would that make sense when, let's say, the other company trades at 1.5 MNAV and let's say you trading at 5 MNAV? Would that potentially make sense instead of just buying the Bitcoin? Because this, yeah.
Yeah, potentially. I think that's a quite possible outcome for the companies in each capital market that maybe they're late entrants, maybe they aren't run as well, who knows what, but they end up not growing as much as the leader, and then any bear market comes along, kind of shakes the the landscape, and valuations dip and MNAVs compress, and then it becomes pretty attractive for both sides, to do a stock-based transaction where you're combining those balance sheets, and if one of those is trading at a much lower MNAV than the other, it can be attractive to both sides. I don't know how those scenarios will actually look, but I do think it's an example of how we're very much aware that in Bitcoin things can and will, the tide will go out at some point, and we've seen it. We've seen BlockFi and Celsius happen. I have the scars from 2018 with altcoins, so I know what can happen. And I think that's part of what I'm inspired by Metaplanet with is, they make quite a point of how low their leverage ratio is, how little debt they have on their balance sheet.
Yep.
I think it's really, really smart to do that because it signals strength. I mean, not only are you hard to attack, but it puts you in a great position if there's opportunities like what we just talked about, in a bear market to opportunistically merge to, greatly increase your stock in an attractive way.
So you're saying convertible bonds it's obviously not something. Wait, correct me if I'm wrong. SWC hasn't done convertible bonds yet,
Right.
and you believe that. I think you said that early on in the life of a back, then it may not be the ideal thing to do.
Yeah. I think there's philosophical angles you could take here of like you could argue both sides. I think that Metaplanet is just such a good model, and they've shown the power of equity issuance and how accretive that can be if you're moving fast and you're small. Issuing Bitcoin denominated convertible notes is, I think, the most attractive debt option out there, which is sort of ironic because you would think that fiat denominated debt would make the most sense because you're shrinking the purchasing power of the thing that you owe,
Hmm.
um, but you want to protect against that bear market scenario. So I think that it actually is the opposite. Um, and right now we're focused on equity issuance because we can generate quite a bit of accretion, quite a bit of scale with that model right now. Um, it takes a lot of time to do convertible notes. You have to set up the structure, legal costs involved, and there's a whole roadshow really of like trying to generate interest and get everybody to agree to terms, and it all needs to be fair and on the same terms. Um, so there's a lot of process there, and it can be attractive, but I think that the thing to focus on is equity issuance. It may turn out that this is something we augment with, right? But I think the bread and butter um, can and should be, and I think will remain, um, ATM style issuance at the life cycle stage we're currently at.
Nice. Jesse, we're kind of up on time, and I want to respect your time. I don't recall I've done a show before where I'm sitting with more questions in the end. Still haven't asked than in the beginning. It was really interesting to hear you talk, and it spun a lot of things in my head. But I know we'll have you back on, and we'll have this conversation again next Wednesday. Andrew will actually be here for a Smarter Webley Wednesday. But Jesse, you're coming back on, and you guys can find Jesse on. You can see his handle on the screen at creases_BTC. I don't know if I'm saying it right. That's why I called you
No, that's
Jesse.
right. Yeah, I
Okay,
didn't know how to pronounce it when I picked that name, but yes, it's Croesus.
creases,
Yeah.
creases. Gotcha. Any final words from your side? Anything you want to share or tell people about, and then we'll end it there.
No, I mean, I think my enthusiasm has come through about what we're doing, the path we're on, the boring path of just exponentially growing our Bitcoin assets
As
held, and hopefully we continue that general trajectory into the future. Meanwhile, our MNAV is at a remarkably low level considering the recent Bitcoin yield delivered. Um, and yeah, so I think that if people are listening to the show, they've done their homework enough on Bitcoin treasury companies and are probably comfortable enough with the math necessary to kind of take stock of the value propositions there. So yeah, hopefully this has been informative to people, and they can do with this information as they will.
well, Jesse, Andy called it a master class. I'm just putting it up there
Thanks,
again.
Andy.
So I agree. Quick, and I promise to end it, but quick, top of the head math. If you're reaching 210,000 Bitcoin in 10 years or whenever, and the market cap, according to my thinking, which you say may or may not, hold true, there'll be an endgame MNAV of maybe 1.45 or 1.5. That would put your market cap at 300,000 Bitcoin. And right now, where you're holding a bit more than 2,000 Bitcoin, your market cap is about 6,500 Bitcoin. So the growth into that is about a 40x in Bitcoin terms, not in dollar terms. In dollar terms or pound terms, it's completely different, obviously. Game. So anyway, just wanted to add that. Thank you so much, Jesse. Glad to finally have you on
Yeah, long time
one of
coming.
my
I met you
shows.
5 years ago, so looking forward to doing the next one of these with you, and we'll talk about what Smarter Web has done in the last few weeks at that point.
Yep, absolutely. Yeah, I think you mentioned 5 years ago at Andy Edstrom's barbecue. I recall that we did some internal calls at when we're both actively engaged with Swan Bitcoin a long time ago. I don't know, probably around 5 years ago as well, or maybe 4 years ago, which is a long time in Bitcoin.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, that's right.
Anyways, thank you so much, Jesse. Thank you everyone for watching. Appreciate you taking the time. And I'll see you guys in the next one. Thank you, Jesse.